Do you want to check out ITProTV but aren't ready to commit? We're making a few episodes from our most popular courses free for you to try here on YouTube so you can see what they're all about. Enjoy this episode and head over to ITPro.tv when you're ready to see the full course.
Hello and thank you for watching ITProTV, helping you level up with IT learning everywhere you go. I'm your host, Zach Memis, for this episode of CompTIA Linux Plus. Linux Command Line is the name of this episode. And once again, Don Pizzette is here because he won't leave. No, it's good to see you, Don. Thank you for joining.
I'm glad to be here, and the police haven't detained me yet.
No, they haven't.
In this episode, we're going to take a look at the command line interface inside of the Linux operating system. Now, a lot of times you will have a graphical user interface available that lets you do a lot of things, but on a server, it's not always going to be there. The one thing you can count on always being there is the CLI, or command line interface. So we're going to explore that in this episode. We'll see what it is, how to access it, and we'll start to look at some of the first basic commands that we'll use to interact with it. And it's important that we get the basics down because the whole rest of the series is going to be all sorts of stuff inside of the command line. So we need to be comfortable in our environment and know how to work with this. So that's all coming up right here in this episode.
Well, how do we access the command line interface?
Well, it does depend a little bit on how your system is set up. So I mentioned like a server. Mm-hmm. On a server, they usually won't install a graphical user interface. So when you power on a server, if you're sitting there at a keyboard and you've got your monitor right in front of you, it'll just boot right to the command line and you're in there, right? But on your desktop or on your own machines, a lot of times you are going to have a graphical interface. And so you're not going to be booting right into it. You're going to be basically dumped into a graphical interface, and you'll have to access it. Now, I've got a diagram up here. The command line interface looks kind of like this, right? You have what's called a shell prompt. And a shell prompt is really just a text-based line and a little flashing cursor that says, please type something, right? It's waiting for you to type a command to tell the system what to do. If your computer boots right to the prompt, it'll normally be a black screen with white text. What we're seeing here is one that's been brought up inside of the GUI. And in those scenarios, sometimes it's a white screen with black text. Sometimes it's black with white text, or people can customize. You can make it whatever color you want. So you don't necessarily know what color it's going to be, but it is going to look very similar to this. You'll have some kind of text over here on the left side, and then a flashing cursor. Now, technically, all this text is optional. It doesn't have to be there. We could remove that. And if it's gone, you would just see a flashing cursor, and you'd need to know, oh, I need to type something. So typically there will be at least something. Even on the most minimal versions of Linux, they'll usually do like a greater than symbol or a colon so that you know, all right, this is a prompt, I can type a command. But others will go a little bit further, and they'll show things like, what's your username? Here in this example, I can see the username is root. And then at localhost, that's the computer that I'm on. It's called localhost, not a very creative name. We'd normally name the system. And then there's a tilde right there, which is actually the file path. And that tilde, it's actually telling me that I'm in my home directory. If I move to a different directory, it would show the name of that directory there. And then that's followed by the pound symbol. And depending on the operating system that you're on, if it's a pound symbol, that'll usually mean you're a regular user. And if it's a $sign, that'll mean that you're a root user, somebody with admin privileges. Right? Actually, I might have that backwards. $sign, pound. Well, either way, it can show you what your permission level is. Not in every operating system. Several of them just keep a pound sign the whole time. So it just depends on how that's set up. But that flashing cursor, that's that common element that we can always count on. Now, if you've fired up a Linux system and you're staring at a graphical user interface like this one, you want to get into the terminal. There's a few different ways to do it. You could, if you were actually sitting at the machine, there's usually a keyboard sequence you can have to switch to a text-based terminal. You'll find that if you hit Control-Alt-F1 through usually like F1 through F8, you can switch through different text-based terminals. And the F2 terminal will be the graphic one that we're on right here, right? That's one way to do it, but it's very uncommon because monitors today have really high resolutions. So when you do that, the text is eensy-weensy tiny. So most of your distros are going to include some kind of graphical-based terminal. And I know I'm saying it's graphical. It's not like it has pictures. It's still command line.
Is there no little bunnies jumping around or anything?
Maybe you could work that out. But it's really just text, but it's done in a scalable font so you can actually see what's going on. And it's usually pretty easy to get at it. Most of the distros have where you can just right-click on your desktop, and a little context menu will pop up, and you'll see Open Terminal right there in that option. Now, if you don't see that, it's not the end of the world. You can probably go up into an application menu of some sort, And you'll oftentimes find the terminal under a favorites list, like I can see right here. There's terminal under my favorites. Or if you go under system tools, you might find it there. And it might be called terminal, like it is in mine. So, looking at this one, it's actually just called terminal, right? Or it might be called Xterm, and that's because it's a terminal for the X Windows interface. The user interface that we're looking here, this graphical stuff, is powered usually by a system called X Windows, and so they may call it Xterm. Uh, I'm also using the Gnome interface here, so there's a Gnome terminal.
Mhm.
There's K. What's the K? It's called console, Konsole. If you're running the KDE user interface. But at the end of the day, they're all a terminal. They usually have an icon that looks like a command prompt. And when you click on it, you'll end up seeing something like this. And again, it might be a white background with black text, might be black with white, whatever, whatever color it's set to. But this is very similar to what I was showing you a moment ago. And I did have the prompt backwards. Notice on my prompt, it's got dpossess. That's me. I'm logged in the system. My system is called localhost. I need to give it a better name. I've got that tilde because I'm in my home directory. And I see the $ there telling me that I'm a regular user. The pound symbol is the root user. The $ is everybody else. So I can see that's the interface that I'm at. And now I'm ready to go and use the system. Now, this is an example of what that terminal looks like on CentOS. If we wanted to see it on something else, like on Ubuntu, it actually looks a little different on Ubuntu. Let me bring up a Ubuntu prompt here real quick. Here we go. So on Ubuntu, it may look something like this. And notice how the prompt is colorized. The team over at Canonical, they like to make their things a little bit prettier, a little better user experience. And so I can see dpossess at Don's laptop. This one's actually named right. And then the little tilde there letting me know the directory I'm in, and the $ that says I'm just a regular user right now. And so now I can start to interact with it. So it looks a little bit different, but functionally it's identical. This is the terminal inside of Ubuntu versus the terminal we were just seeing inside of CentOS.
Is the CLI the same on all Linux distros?
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
Once you get in there, like I said they look basically the same. The commands are almost identical, but there can be a little variation that you need to watch out for. When you access the command line interface, there's actually something running called a command interpreter. And the command interpreter takes whatever you're typing and figures out what to do with it. Well, most Linux distros use the same interpreter. They use something that's called bash, which is short for the born again shell. It's the shell interface that we're typing into, and it's basically interpreting our command. So if I'm on one bash system, that's maybe CentOS, and I get up and I go over to a Debian system that's also running bash, everything's going to be the same. Even though it's two different distros, even though the prompts may be different colors and so on, I can use my same commands. All right. But not everybody uses the same shell. Sometimes you'll find where they use dash or KSH, CSH, different ones. Each one has different pros and cons. And if you go to a different shell, it might have extra functionality that's not present in another shell. So depending on the shell that you end up in, you may have something completely different. Looking at these visually, it's hard to tell what shell you're in. I don't necessarily know if I'm in ZSH or KSH or Bash. What most distros will do is they'll always link the shell to a file in a directory. I don't know, we haven't really looked at the file system yet, but /bin/sh. And if I take a look at /bin/sh, what I can see here is that that file is linked to the bash shell. And so I'm in the bash shell on this system, but not everybody links the same. In fact, let me go back over to that Ubuntu window that I had open, and I'll do the same thing on it. And yeah, actually, here's a great one. So I can see where that /bin/sh is linked to dash, a different shell. Now, honestly, probably 99% of the commands we do in bash work the same on dash, and so I don't really care that it's a different shell. But there's that 1% of commands that might be a little bit different. So always be on the lookout for that. Your system may only have one shell option. You might only have bash, and that's it. Or you might have one of those distros that has 8 or 9 shells, or there's other ones that you can even install if you want to branch out and try different ones. But they really all have different benefits. Personally, I always stick to bash. I always use bash because, one, it's the most popular. It's very old, very mature. And two, it's the default for most of the distros that are out there. So if you get comfortable in bash, you'll be taken care of most of the time. So that's typically what I recommend.
How do we execute commands in the CLI, Don?
Executing a command is just a matter of typing it. Well, I mean, step one, you got to know the command, right? And that takes a little practice, or watching a series like this. Throughout this series, each episode, we're going to be learning more and more commands and building our tool set. But when you first get into the prompt, it's a little intimidating, right? So there's a couple of commands that we can use to start our navigation. I've actually already run a few commands here, but let's pretend that I haven't. When you start typing commands, you're telling the computer to do something, and it's interpreting that command and doing something with it.
Hmm.
I know I'm in my home directory because I see that little tilde right there in the prompt. Okay. If I want to see the files that are in my home directory, I can type ls. That's the list command, right? So it's abbreviated down to ls. And when I type that, it shows me all the files that are in my home directory right now. So I can see them. And some of them are colorized because some are folders versus text files, and some are executable. I've got one called resolution.sh. So that's an executable script, so it's green. But I can see each of those files thanks to the ls command. I just typed it and ran it. Or I can do uname. That tells it to show me the Unix name of the system, or tell me what operating system I'm running. And so when I run that, it says, hey, you're running Linux, right? I'm just typing a command and it executes. Typically, what we're doing is we're providing input. They call it the standard input. We're inputting a command, and then it's giving us output, the standard output, what we're seeing on our screen, right? If I want to see the commands that I've typed, there's actually a neat command called history. And when you type history, it shows you all the different commands that you've typed since you have started using this system. And in fact, on this show, the first command I ran was this guy right here, right? So those are the 4 commands that I've run in this show. But you can see that I've run plenty of other commands on this system previously, just doing other stuff, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So the history command lets you see that. And so if you can't remember, like, what was that command that I ran? Type history, and you can find it in there. Now, if you have a bunch of stuff on your screen like I do, you can type clear, and that'll reset the screen and get back up to the top. Now, that didn't clear out my commands. All that stuff is still tucked away in the background, but it just neatens up the screen and gets me ready to type. So I'm just typing a command to tell the computer to do something, and then it does it, right? So that's basically the way that it works, but knowing the command is really the hardest part.
So, what are some common commands we may use?
All right, so we've seen a couple.
Hmm.
You know, let me go a step further on some of these. The commands that I just showed you, like ls and uname, those are fairly common commands, but we usually change the way they work a little bit. Like you might have noticed when I ran uname and it told me I'm running Linux. Great. That doesn't sound very useful,
Yay.
right? I'll tell you, I use the uname command a lot, but I know I'm running Linux already when I'm on this system. I don't
Hmm.
need a command prompt to tell me that.
Hmm.
Well, a lot of these commands will take arguments and modifiers to how they function. So, going back here, if we take a look at a command like the ls command, there's options and arguments that we can apply that change the way that it functions, right? An option is like a modifier. I'm telling it, hey, normally when you run, you do XYZ, but this time I want you to do it a little bit differently than normal. Those are options that we can provide. And then arguments is where we point it at something. And we say, like, instead of running right here in the directory I'm in, I want you to run in some other directory, look somewhere else, right? So that's an argument that we apply with a target, a destination, where we're looking, right? Those two things can really change how a command functions. So when we talk about common commands, some of them might not look very useful. If I say, yeah, uname is a really common command, that might not mean anything to you, right? But if I ran uname-a, all of a sudden it tells me a heck of a lot more. It doesn't just say, hey, you're running Linux, good luck, right? It tells me you're running Linux and your computer is called localhost and the kernel you're running is version 3.10.0. Blah, 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 blah. I'm running a multiprocessor system. The current date is this. The hardware architecture is 64-bit. And this is GNU/Linux. I get a lot of really valuable information.
Hmm.
I use this command a lot because I want to know what kernel version I'm on, right? Uname-a tells me that. And how did I know to do a -a? Well, the short answer is I memorized it, right? So that's easy. But let's say I didn't. There's another command, and this should probably be your number one go-to command. And this one is man, which is short for manual. We can pull up the manual for any command. If I want to know how to use uname, right? We can run man, uname, and it's going to give me instructions. And it'll say, all right, when you run uname, you can run it by yourself or
Hmm.
by itself. Or there's some options that you can specify, and then it lists the options like dash A, show me all of the information. It gives me a bunch of stuff. I could limit it just to the kernel or the kernel release, depending on what it is that I'm trying to find. All that is going to be displayed right there. I use the man command every single day. Now, I've been using Linux since 1993, so for a long time.
Wow.
But you're never going to memorize all of the commands, all the options, all the arguments. It is just too much. So even to this day, I still use the man command when I'm pulling up some command that I don't use all that often.
Hmm.
And I say, all right, well, how do I actually turn encryption on when I'm tarring an archive? And I might have to come in and pull the documentation for it. And it's all in here. So it's really, really cool to be able to see that. We're going to look at the man command a little bit more later in the series, but that's a really handy one to pull that documentation up. Some other common commands. Let's see. I showed ls, right? Ls pulls up a directory of or a listing of the directory that you're in. So all the files and folders that are in that directory. It's pretty handy. A lot of times I'll do some options to change the way that the output is rendered. So this the output right now is kind of horizontal, right? So it's just laying out all the files and folders like that. I usually prefer to have it vertical, a bit of a longer output. And I like to see additional information like the size of the files and the permissions and so on. And so if you do ls-l, that gives you a longer listing, puts it in a full list format. And so when I run that, now the output looks a lot different. Everything is in a vertical form, and I see the file sizes, and I see a lot of other information we're going to talk about in the permissions episode. All the stuff on the left side, that's file permissions.
Hmm.
So I see a lot more. Well, there's even more in my home directory. For example, there's hidden files in my home directory that I'm not seeing. Okay, I know they're there, but I can't see them. Well, if I do ls-l to get the long listing and -a to say show me all the files, now look how many more files there are, right?
Goodness.
See these ones that start with a dot? Those are hidden files or hidden folders. So there's a lot of stuff that was hidden away in my directory that I can see now, all right? And when you're doing more than one option, like I'm doing here, you can actually combine them. So instead of doing -l -a, I can combine that to -la, right? Stick those together, and now when I run it, I get the same output. It doesn't look any different. And I'm kind of in the habit of actually doing LAH. These file sizes are in bytes. Well, I'm used to dealing with megabytes and gigabytes and bigger numbers, right? Bytes like this is a pretty kind of annoying way to store things sometimes. So I usually do LAH, and when you run it that way, it'll show you in bytes if the file's actually that small, or it'll do kilobytes, megabytes, gigabytes if it's a bigger file. It's making it a human readable format. So that's a modification there too. And the important thing here is that as far as common commands, it's not normally just a command we need to remember. It's usually a set of options that go along with it to really make use of it. A few other commands. I've been in my home directory this whole time. The home directory is kind of boring. I might want to move to a different directory, and we can use CD to change directory. Now, CD by itself isn't going to do much, right? I have to tell it where I'm changing the directory to. So I might want to change directory into my root file system. I'm just going to do CD/. And when I do that, see how my prompt changed?
Hmm.
And instead of a tilde, now it's got a slash telling me I'm in the root. And I might want to get into, let's go into the var folder. So I'm going to go into var. And now my prompt has changed again to show that I'm in the var folder. And now when I run ls, I'm going to see the files that are in here instead of the files in my home directory. And when I do ls-lah, I'll see all of that kind of listed right there. There's all those files. Now, I didn't actually have to change that directory. If I go back to my home directory, which remember we have a tilde as like an alias that points me to my home directory. If I go back to my home directory, I could have done ls-lah, those are my options, and then provided an argument and said, I want you to look inside of /var. And it would look over there and give me that output. So we have a lot of different possibilities when we work with commands like these. As you navigate around, sometimes you can get lost, or sometimes it's hidden from you, like what directory you're in, right? I know I'm in my home directory, but where is the home directory? You can type pwd, and that's going to show you your present working directory. And when you do that, I can see I'm actually in /home/dpossett, right? That's the path. So right now, I see my files. If I were to do a CD/ to move back to the root, and then go to cd home and cd dpossess, right? It changes to a tilde, but I know I'm in my home directory, right? That's where my files are. Or I could do an ls and point it to /home /dpossess, and I would see those same files. So using pwd is a great way to figure out where you're at, especially if you walked away for a minute and you come back, you don't remember what directory you're in. There's other commands that are really handy, like echo. The echo command can be used to show text on the screen. If I do like echo hello world, right? The world's first easy program that people learn in college, then it'll echo that on the screen. And so I see hello world. We use echo a lot of times to put data into files. So we'll see that later on in the series. Speaking of files, if we want to create a file, you can create an empty file by using the touch command. So I've got file 1, 2, and 3.txt in my home directory. Maybe I'll do a touch file 4.txt. And when I do that, I can pull up a listing, and now I've got file 4.txt sitting right there. I've created a new file right there. Touch is a great way to create an empty file. There's nothing in it, but I've at least created the file, so now it's available for me to put things in afterwards. And I can also copy files. If I have a file and I want to make a duplicate of it, I can do CP to copy the file, and I might want to copy file 4.txt to file 5.txt. So the first argument is the source, and the second argument is the destination. And I'll type it, and now I'll have a file 5. And how did I know the order of the arguments? Well, I know how the command works. Or if I didn't, I could always do man CP, and then it would tell me the source is first, and then the destination. When you look at a man page like this, if there's something in square brackets, right? So see how these options are in square brackets? Square brackets means it's optional. You don't have to have it. You can choose to put it there, but you don't have to. If there's no bracket, like source and destination, that means you have to have it. These are required arguments in order to run the command. So you'll see that throughout the documentation. Sometimes things are required, sometimes they aren't.
Well, can we edit files from within the CLI done?
Yeah, I'm showing you commands, right? And these are just commands we run, and I think everything I've shown you pretty much has been you just get in, get out, and that's it, right? It runs the command and it's done. But there's actually full-on applications that we can launch. So if I want to edit file 5.txt and put data in there, I can modify that file and change it by calling another program, right? So most Linux systems have an editor built into them called Vi or VI. Some people call it V, whatever you want to call it. That's an editor. Some have Nano or gedit. There's a number of command line editors that you can use. And if I want to edit one of these files, I would just call that program. So if I want to use Vi, for example, I would type VI. And then as an argument, I would tell it the file that I wanted to edit. I'm going to edit /home /dpossess /file5.txt, right? Or I could actually abbreviate this down. Remember, tilde is a shortcut to the home directory. So I could have just typed tilde /file5.txt, right? So that's where that file is. And when I go to edit that, now I'm in the Vi editor, and I can start typing whatever it is that I want to do, right? Type in all that text, and I can save that. And now I've put data in there. And I use the Vi editor. Let's see if I have Nano. I'm not sure if I have Nano on this system or not. So I'm going to do Nano for file5.txt. There we go. And I see my text. Same basic thing. A lot of people prefer Nano over Vi because it's a little bit more user-friendly. But Vi is very, very powerful. So I'll just type in here, this is some more text. There we go. And I will save that file. All right. So here I'm calling a program, and I'm in that program doing something until I choose to save and exit. So it's not just like Uname where I run it, it does something and it's done. The program, we stay in it until we decide to exit. So a little bit of a variation there. And you may have other utilities. If I just want to see what's in the files, I don't actually need a full editor for that. I can use things like cat, which actually it stands, wait, the original, I'm trying to remember what it originally stood for. Sometimes with Unix, there's a lot of history to a command.
Stands for catty.
Yeah, it's part of like catenate, I believe. But if I can cat a file.
Oh, yeah. Concatenate?
Like concatenate, yeah, because
Yeah.
we're not attaching two things,
Yeah.
it's just a single thing.
Mhm.
I can point it to a file like this, cat dot slash, actually using that dot is an alias for the current directory that I'm in.
Mhm.
I could also do tilde, same thing, file5.txt, and it shows me the text that's in there. Very plain and simple, right? It just shows it to me and that's it.
Right.
I could also do the more command, which is going to look basically the same, But what more does, if it's more than one screen of data, it will pause and let me hit a button to advance and move through a document slowly. So that's kind of a handy thing to do when you have a large document. My document's so small here that it doesn't really matter, but a more command would help with that. And there's another one called less, which is very similar, except it lets you scroll up and down. More only lets you scroll down. Less lets you scroll back up again if you want. So less is actually more.
Less is
the
more.
saying.
Yeah, there you go.
How they picked the name for that one.
Mhm.
So those are some other utilities that are likely present on your system, and they're ones I use all the time. If you're reading log files, if you're examining settings, you want to see your user configurations, you're going to use less. You're going to use cat. You're going to use Vim or Vi, Nano, whatever your editors are. Those are all different things that you'll make use of as you work from the command line.
Are there any other tips or tricks for the CLI?
For some of these commands, they can be kind of long, and as you're typing them, most of the Linux distros today support what's called tab autocomplete, where if you type part of a command, you can hit tab and it'll kind of fill out the rest of the command for you. So, for example, if I wanted to run nslookup, right, that's a command for doing name server lookups, I could just type nsl, and then if I hit tab on my keyboard, it types the rest of the command for me, right? You have a lot of commands on your system. If you ever take a look inside of /usr/bin, you'll see a ton of commands that are available. And there's actually even more than these because there's the bash aliases and so on. But these are all different commands, and there's a ton of them, right? But if you can type enough letters so that it knows exactly what it is you're trying to get, then you can use tab autocomplete. So see all these commands that start with SG? There's a lot of commands that start with SG. So if I just type SG and hit tab, it doesn't know which one that I want. But if I go a little bit further and type SG space U, there's only one command that starts with SG and then U. And so it would know that was the one that I was trying to run, and tab autocomplete would pull it up. So if I do SG_U and hit a tab, there it is, SG unmap, and so it shows up. Now, if you know what the command does, then it's easy to find them. If you don't know what the command does, sometimes it's hard to even figure out what command you're supposed to be typing. You can use the man pages, but the man pages expect you to know the name as well. So if you absolutely just have no idea, like, what command can I use to delete a file? You can try and guess around and look, but you're typically going to need to go to the documentation. And there's numerous websites that provide great documentation on Linux, but we're actually going to see a lot of the commands throughout this series. So by the time we get to the end of it, you'll have a full tool set and understand a lot of the commands that are available to manipulate your Linux installation.
Well, if that isn't an enticement to watch everything in the CompTIA Linux Plus line, I don't know what is. And this has been the Linux command line. Hey, before we move on, Don, what else would you like to say?
It's really about it. The command line is a big deal. Right? We just spent 25 minutes or whatever talking about it, but you can work with it for years and years and still learn new things. A lot of the commands that I showed you, like the history command, it was just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much cool stuff you can do. And there's tons and tons of aliases and shortcuts that you'll learn over time. So don't try and tackle that all at once. Just grab a handful of commands, start to learn those. And as you build up your tool set, you'll find there's a ton of shortcuts that can save you time.
Thank you, Don. You're doing a wonderful job as usual. And this is CompTIA Linux Plus, and there's so much more to come, so stay with us. We hope you join us, and we hope also you take advantage of the supplementary information in our course library. It's there to help you be more successful, so check that out too. And tell everybody you know about ITProTV. ITProTV is binge-worthy. Thanks for watching. I'm Zach Memis.
And I'm Don Pizzette.
We will see you again soon.
Thank you for watching ITProTV.